Welcome. In this episode, I'm going to show you how to make sassy sourdough pizza crust. It's sassy because sourdough has that wonderful tangy flavor. Pizza crust is much easier to make when you use sourdough starter as opposed to yeast. Plus, you can use the starter for making breads or even cinnamon rolls. Chances are you have a friend or a friend knows someone who has some sourdough starter, so ask around. As an alternative, you can order a starter online. This is my starter. I've had it about 10 years. When you let it sit in the refrigerator after you've fed it, it ferments and it forms this liquid on top. That's just fine. You can also buy starter online and it comes in a dehydrated form like this. This is what you'll need. Sourdough starter, all-purpose flour, salt, this is fancy salt but you can use regular, olive oil, I like to add oregano to my crust, measuring spoons and a cup, a bowl, and a tea towel. You might ask, what is a tea towel? It's just a thin towel as opposed to a dish towel, which is much thicker. You'll see why later. The liquid on the top is called hooch, and it has an alcohol content anywhere from 3 to 10%, but I wouldn't try to drink it because it's probably pretty nasty. Pour the liquid off. If you stick to strict sourdough recipes, they have you pour off some of your starter, which is called discard, and measure how much you have, and then calculate in grams how much flour and water you need to add. I'm no drug dealer, so I'm going to stick to ounces, and what I do is I estimate, and I've been doing this for 10 years, never had a problem. So I take my sourdough starter, this looks like it's about a cup to me, then I'm adding a cup of flour, use a rubber or silicone spatula, and add a cup of water and stir. You don't have to stir it a lot, just make sure that all of the ingredients are mixed together so you don't have any of the dry flour floating around in there. It'll look a little bit lumpy, but that's fine. This process is called feeding the sourdough. I call it feeding my beasts. The little beasts are yeast and bacteria. Then we're going to take that tea towel that we made nice and wet, wrung it out, and then put it on top of the starter. The reason that you wet the tea towel is because if you don't, there'll be a crust on top. Otherwise, this increases the humidity and makes it for a better environment for the bacteria and yeast to eat that flour and water. Now we're going to let it sit, and how long it sits depends on your environment, whether it's hot, cold, humid, etc. We're going to come check on it in a couple of hours. It's been 2 hours since I've let the starter feed, and my place is a little bit cold, so it's taking a little bit longer. You can see that there's a few bubbles here. When the starter feeds, it releases gas. Ideally, we'd like it to be a lot more bubbly and for the starter to double in size. So ideally, I'd wait a couple more hours, but for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to go ahead and make the dough. It maybe won't rise as much, but for our purposes, we're going to be refrigerating the dough and not using it right away, so it's going to be fine. For this recipe, we'll need 4 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, and a tablespoon of oregano. Mix all the dry ingredients together. I like to use a whisk, but if you have a fork and don't have a whisk, it's just fine. Use that same measuring cup you used for the flour and put in 1.33 cups of water. Now we'll measure out a cup of starter. Just get it right from the bowl. Add 3 tablespoons of olive oil. I'm going to pour that in and mix it up. As I mix it more, you'll see that it gets thicker and more dough-like. Now for the messy part. Make sure you wash your hands, take all your jewelry, watches, bracelets off. I brought the bowl down to a lower counter space. Now I'm going to knead it. If you find that the dough is a little sticky, a little bit wet, just add a little bit more flour. I've been kneading this for about 5 minutes. You can see it's no longer sticking to the side of the bowl. I can pick it up and it's a nice solid piece of dough. So now I'm ready to put it in a storage container. Now you don't necessarily need to add olive oil to this recipe. I think it tastes better. But for putting it in storage, you really need to line whatever container you put in with olive oil so you can get it out. I prefer to use these silicone reusable bags as opposed to plastic. Just pour some olive oil in there, add the dough, and seal it up, put it in the refrigerator. It's going to be good for about 2 weeks. So in my next episode, I will show you how to roll out the pizza crust and make a fun pizza. Pour the remainder of your starter into a clean bowl, seal it and put it in the refrigerator. You can feed it once a week. I've gone as long as 3 weeks, but if you don't think that you're going to be feeding it on a regular schedule, you can freeze it or you can dehydrate it by spreading it out on parchment paper with a spatula and letting it dry, and it ends up looking like this. I hope you enjoy the Sassy sourdough pizza crust recipe. If you're enjoying these videos, please like me, follow me, and I'd love to see your comments.